Hey guys, it's me here, and I'm excited to bring you part 1 of my story of how Jesus Christ delivered me from the Jezebel spirit. If you haven't listened to part 1 and 2 of this series and are unfamiliar with the Jezebel spirit and the Jezebel who lived in the Old Testament, I encourage you to check them out first so you can get a quick crash course on what these next couple videos will be about. So, I'm almost 30 now, but I'm going to take you back to my childhood because that's where this all begins. The majority of my earlier years, all throughout my upbringing, I primarily lived with my single mother, and we naturally had some pretty considerable financial struggles. There was a lot of moving around, a lot of time spent with other family members, primarily my mom's mom and my aunt, who was only like 10 or 11-ish years older than me and still in grade school. So I grew up with her being more like my big sister. This aunt, I'm just going to make up a random name and call her Carly for her privacy. This aunt was also extremely close to my mom, so needless to say, the three of us spent a lot of time together throughout the years, whether we were all living under the same roof or not. I looked up to her and idolized her in every way. Another thing I should explain, just to kind of set the stage here, is that I've been a so-called Christian my entire life, but not a true follower of Jesus until the last year and a half or so. My mom has always been incredibly close with Jesus since she was in her late teens and has many spiritual gifts. She's always had dreams and visions and prophetic words from the Lord that I just never thought were in the cards for me. I lived most of my life believing the lies of the enemy, that Jesus only loved my mom and I wasn't meant to have a close relationship with him in that way. I was totally tricked by the enemy for so many years. Looking back, I can clearly see the ways God spoke to me and worked in my life, even giving me spiritual gifts as well, but I never learned to listen or follow him all those years. Until late 2018, right before I turned 28, I had no idea I had been living under some extremely strong demonic oppression since I was 13 years old. Anytime I did want to seek God over the years, I would always use my mom as a spiritual crutch too. I never had an active prayer life or studied the Lord's word or did anything to seek him. I just ran to my mom to give me answers, taking the easy way out. So that's me, or that was me. But with Carly, who is also a quote Christian, she was always incredibly envious of my mom's spiritual gifts. Carly was always controlling and stubborn and insubordinate and just kind of followed her own path in life. But honestly, her Jezebel tendencies stayed hidden for a pretty long time. Or I guess they stayed hidden to us and her relationship with my mom and I, or we just didn't want to accept what they were. I don't really know. But most of her control issues, I think, were more so taken out on her boyfriend and now husband, who I'll call Ian for his privacy. But over the years, Carly's jealousy of my mom's spiritual gifts started to become more and more apparent, and her character started to twist into something completely different than the Carly I fell in love with when I was just a baby. I'm not going to spend much more time than this diving into Carly's character and giving you examples of everything she's done against my mom and I and pretty much the entire family, because I just really don't want to go there again in my mind, and it'll make me sin in my heart and my mouth. So all you need to know is that over the course of many years, Carly has allowed the Jezebel spirit and all its witchcraft to ultimately take control of her life and her marriage, and now has regrettably destroyed our immediate family. She embodies all the traits I touched on in the previous video. Okay, so one night, it was either the summer that I was going into 8th or 9th grade, I think it was 9th grade, I was spending the night at Carly and Ian's house. While I was asleep on my back on their living room floor, I awoke to my body drastically springing awake. The Holy Spirit said to me, "You are in the presence of a demon." I had never heard Jesus speak to me like that before. It wasn't audible like a human voice, but it was just a really strong voice in my spirit. I can't really describe it, but it was so clear. There was no mistake that it was Jesus speaking to me. I had always been terrified of all things spooky, and not having a solid relationship with Jesus at that time, I just became overwhelmed with a crippling fear. I don't think I prayed or did anything else when this happened other than go into another room and shut the door. I had no idea how to tell Carly and Ian what happened the next day, so I told my mom and asked her to tell them. When she did, they both got really defensive and denied the possibility of anything evil dwelling in their home. I don't think it was ever brought up again after that. Fast forward to the summer between my freshman and sophomore years of college. During this time, the Lord started giving me dreams about Carly and my grandmother. My grandmother is also spiritually sick, but she doesn't really tie into the purpose of this video, so I'll just tell you the main dream that I had about Carly. In the dream, I was standing in an old apartment that the four of us used to live in together. Two demons emerged from two apartment bedrooms, one that belonged from my grandmother's bedroom and the other from Carly's. In the dream, I had the knowledge that each demon belonged to the owner of each respective room that they emerged from. My grandmother's demon was enormous in size, but it wasn't concerned with me. Carly's demon, however, was a small, petite, flesh-colored demon that was very innocent in appearance. It was faceless, hidden. I was the subject of this demon's focus and found myself laughing and being charmed by it while it danced me back into Carly's old room. You would think that I might want to pray about this or at least consider taking this dream seriously, but in the same fashion I've lived my entire life until recently, I just shrugged the dream off and carried on with my life. In the few years after this, my mom ultimately separated from this side of the family completely, and until recently I never understood why. My mom never wanted to turn me against anyone and always wanted me to make my own decisions. At some point in college, I do remember my mom gently telling me about the Jezebel and Ahab spirits and that Carly and Ian carried this duo. That's what the Lord was revealing to her at that time. But I was in complete denial about it. My mom had suffered at the hands of several family members over the years, but me, not so much. It wasn't until a few years later that I started to actually see Carly's true character. And it wasn't until Jesus literally forced me to have complete separation from them last summer that I realized my mom's separation wasn't her own choosing either. It was all part of the Lord's rescue mission for both of us. Okay, back to the timeline. A couple years after the beige fleshy demon dream, I was still very close with Carly and Ian, but my mom was almost completely separated from them at that point. I remember near the end of 2011, Ian invited me to go on a mission trip with them at their church. They were going somewhere overseas where Hinduism is prevalent, but I can't remember exactly where it was. I was planning on going, but the Lord had other plans and sent me a message through my mom to not go. I didn't understand the spiritual dangers she was speaking of at that time, but now I do, and I didn't go. It was also around this time that every, quote, favor or gift that I received from Carly and Ian ended up putting me in dangerous spiritual situations. I'll give you just one example. In the early spring of 2012, I was living with a different uncle and temporarily out of college due to a medical emergency that happened with my dad the year before. I was starting to wake up spiritually during that time. The Lord was giving me many dreams and started to heal me of certain things during this time. But for the first time in my life since I was in junior high, I was starting to turn to Him with my whole heart. But before I was able to really get to that point, to like a life-changing point, I was totally derailed when Ian helped me get a side job at a nearby restaurant. Before I knew it, I was drinking and smoking pot every night with my manager, coworker, and manager's roommate, who I started to also sleep with. These are all things many people think are normal and innocent, especially for a college-age person, but these are not good things to slide into. There are some other interesting dynamics going on with these two guys that I can't really get into in this video, and probably not ever. But ultimately the situation wasn't good, just on multiple levels. It was pretty messed up. Anyway, I became enthralled with the roommate that I was messing around with and continued to see him nearly every weekend, even after I moved back down to college that was a few hours away. He was way too old for me, by the way. To anyone who is an outsider looking into that situation, it wouldn't make any sense. It didn't make sense to me, actually. There was no good reason for him to want to hang out with a 21-year-old. But it all happened the way it did until the fall of 2012, when the guy completely dropped me out of nowhere. It started one morning when I woke up in his bed in the exact same way I had woken on Carly and Ian's floor years before. This time I was having a demonic dream in this guy's room and woke up to my body springing up again like I described earlier. Then I started having all these different demonic dreams about him. God was giving me eyes to see the truth of the entire situation. In one dream I had the knowledge the guy was a demon and he had me in a chokehold. In the other I woke up springing up from my bed again, making a noise from my mouth like a guttural noise as if I was expelling a demon that I had been carrying in real life. God was moving so much in my life that fall. Without me even asking Him to, He was just doing this massive, amazing cleanup work inside of me. The last dream I had about that guy, I watched as he fell into the ocean. I was about to jump in and drown with him, but then I turned around, and the Lord literally parted the waters for me to walk back to shore safely. In the dream, I heard him say, "I will make a way," just like he says in Isaiah 43:19. "I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert." And just like he parted the sea for Moses and the Israelites as he delivered them from the hand of the Egyptians. He's just so good, y'all. Sorry. Okay. But all of that to say, that entire situation all came about because of that, quote, favor that Ian had done for me, when really it was just the enemy's plan to derail what God was doing with me at that time. This is emotional. Ian was just a vessel for that plan of the enemy's destruction. And I really was thoroughly derailed. Even after Jesus parted the seas for me to deliver me into safety and started giving me prophetic dreams, I spiraled into another spiritually devastating situation with another guy and completely lost my entire identity in drugs and alcohol and total darkness. But I'm getting off track again. Now we're going to fast forward from 2012 to the summer of 2018. I'll start with a few dreams I had during that time. Keep in mind, I was not walking with Jesus at all at this point. I was living in my flesh in every way you could imagine. Little did I know that there were intercession prayers being fervently made on my behalf by my mother. These next few dreams marked the beginning of Christ and his great mercy answering those prayers. In the first dream, I was kneeling in a prayer stance in my kitchen, beginning to bow my head. Carly was standing above me on my left side, while Ian was standing in the distance, helping Carly control the situation. Instead of humbly bowing my head down, as one normally would do in prayer, Carly lifted my head all the way up as if I was supposed to be looking up at the ceiling or in her direction when I prayed, exalting her or myself rather than bowing in reverence to the Lord. She did this slowly, methodically, with a very straight face. It was kind of ritualistic. She was very serious and did not at all appear to be kind-hearted. Though she had no words to me in the dream, I remember being manipulated into feeling guilty, as if I had been praying wrong for my whole entire life. Neither her nor Ian spoke once in the dream. It was all silent, religious control, a manifestation of the religious spirit. Then I dreamed that I was standing in my kitchen. This might have been a few months later. It was made known to me that something evil was in my home, down the hall, but I didn't move to address it. Then there was a knock at the door, and a bunch of what appeared to be friendly men, but all in black, entered my apartment and walked into my room. I didn't stop them, didn't even try. I was confused about why they were there, but didn't question them. Then, while I was standing in the kitchen, as they were doing whatever they were doing in my room, I started praying. I don't remember if I was praying for protection or what I was praying over, but my jaw was completely locked. The words were coming out, and I was still saying what I was trying to say, but with great physical resistance. I was oppressed. And by the way, I had had many dreams like that over the previous few years. Always trying to pray in my dreams, but never really being able to do so. Always being met with physical and spiritual resistance. I had no idea how spiritually compromised I was. Oh, and this is also when my poop dreams started happening. Yeah, you heard that right. Poo-poo started appearing in my dreams. In the first one, I was in Carly and Ian's bathroom, sitting on the toilet. This was all like the same summer. This is all when these dreams started happening. I was doing what you do in the bathroom. Sorry for the description, but I promise there's biblical relevance here that'll tie in later. But the waste, when it landed, it didn't go in the toilet. Instead, it dropped on the floor next to me. Even though it was my own waste, I felt like Carly and Ian needed to clean it up, and it was their responsibility to do so. I left the bathroom and came back sometime or after some time had elapsed to see if the waste had been cleaned up, but it wasn't. Instead, Carly and Ian had it sitting under a pile of random toys and objects that they had placed there, swept under the rug, just like what they do with all the conflict they create. Even though owning up, apologizing, changing, cleaning up their own mess that they created in our relationship would be the right thing to do, I'm never going to get an apology or acknowledgement, because to them, I am the issue. I had several other poop dreams over the next few months. In another, I was in a house at my grandfather's old house in a room at my grandfather's old house where at one point all of my mom's entire immediate family used to live. Instead of scooping the family's dog's poop and disposing of it properly, I made yard statues and sculptures out of it and placed it on display in the front yard for all the neighbors to see. The big picture here is that there was clearly waste in my life that I needed to deal with, but I didn't really know that it was waste, and I was refusing to dispose of it if I did. And then I will get into the biblical relevance of that later, I promise. It was at the end of 2018 when my life started to completely change. I'm going to make a separate video about that, but long story short, God woke me up. And after repenting of many, many, many sins that I had been unapologetically living in up until that point, the Lord started pouring His Spirit out so heavy on me. After dealing with some specific sin I'll talk about in a different video, Jesus confronted me with the Carly and Ian issue in a way that I never saw coming. Okay, please stay with me. I know I'm kind of all over the place right now. Okay, here we go. On the night of September 30th, 2018, I had this dream. I was in a room with my mom, Carly, and grandmother. We were all sitting on the floor, and in the dream we were all on good terms. It was a room I've never seen in real life before, small and plain, with just a bed with a white comforter on the left side. We were talking about 2 strands of pearls, one that belonged to me and one that belonged to Carly. I think they had both been passed down to us, but my pearls were genuine and Carly's were fake. I was given that knowledge. When Carly mentioned my strand of pearls, in the dream it reminded me that my pearls were actually missing and Carly was responsible for it. I wasn't really mad at her about it, but I politely told her I had never gotten them back from her. I said this with hope and belief that she would realize this and give my pearls back to me. She acknowledged that she hadn't given me my pearls back, but tried to shift the blame onto my great-grandmother, who I knew had nothing to do with the fact that Carly was refusing to give me my pearls back. Then I noticed a huge spider had formed a large web towards the bottom of the bed in front of me, behind my mom and Carly. I stood up to look at it and saw that it was a very skinny spider, which at first looked fine and harmless. But the more I looked at it, the more I realized how dangerous and wicked it was. It was very large and had formed its large web at the bottom of the bed. I stood up and grabbed a book to kill it, but was too afraid to get close, so I threw the book across the room in hopes it would land on the spider and the spider would be killed from a distance. Instead, the book landed next to my mom, just close enough to startle the spider. The spider then started to charge directly for me, very fast, towards my left side, as I stood still in fear. It got up to my feet and was about to crawl up my left side when I woke up from the dream. Okay, so now I'm awake in real life. I woke up wide awake, looked up at my bedroom shelf to the left, same side the spider was about to crawl up in my dream. The space that I was looking up at in my apartment has a lot of light coming through at night, so I know that what I saw in this particular spot of my apartment was unmistakable. So I look up, and floating in this space on top of my cookie jar was a huge black spider demon. Almost a black shadowy thing, but no doubt it was the form of a spider with a lot of legs, like way more than 8. It probably had at least 50 to 100 legs, and they were all moving. The entire thing was probably about a square foot at least. I looked away, then back at the spider, then away again, then back, over and over to make sure that I wasn't imagining things. I certainly wasn't imagining things, but I very calmly convinced myself that I was still dreaming and went back to sleep. I think God was showing me such kindness in that moment, because I think if I really did understand what I was seeing at that time, when I was still so spiritually weak, I think I would have been totally devoured in fear. I had some other dreams that night when I fell back asleep. In one, I had the knowledge that I had been carrying layers and layers of cat litter in my left eye, litter that I had been carrying with me for years but never noticed it. In the dream, I was starting to remove it from my eye. In another, I was being driven in the back of my grandfather's van, and I never smell in my dreams, but in this one the stench was so foul that it was unbearable. But I found a hidden sunroof in the van and stuck my head out to breathe fresh air. In another, I was being chased by a swarm of hornets, but I was never stung. The Lord was giving me eyes to see, breathing new life in me. I was safe in His protection. It took me a few days to wrap my head around what I saw. At first, I brushed it off and told myself I was still sleeping, but I knew that that wasn't true. Then I went online and convinced myself that I was having night hallucinations. I found a name for it, blamed it on sleep paralysis, found all different types of diagnoses to make it all make sense. Still, I knew deep down that that wasn't true either. Eventually, by the end of that week, in another creepy dream, this time about a frog, I knew that there was no denying what I saw. Later that week, I prayed about it for the first time. Knowing the spider had something to do with Carly in the dream I had, I started praying about Carly. As I prayed, I began to weep. I was confused about why I was crying, and why I was crying so hard at that. And when I asked God why I was reacting this way, I heard in my spirit, "She has hurt you." The more I thought about it, the more amazed I was that something so evident had been such a mystery to me. For years, I had been telling myself that I was okay with our relationship and never acknowledged what she has become, who she is, and especially how she has treated my mom. This hurt me on a level so deep that I hadn't even realized it or wanted to confront it within myself. It was just all too much to bear. On October 5th, 2018, as I was driving, I asked God to prepare my heart for prayer when I got home. He didn't wait till I got home, and He started speaking right then. I heard very clearly, "You are still in alliance with her." Yeah, that's still hard to even say, even though I'm not anymore. You are still in alliance with her. Hearing this made me really uncomfortable, and I immediately began questioning if this was my voice or His that I was hearing, but I knew it was His. I got home and started praying. I started repenting my emotional alliance to her and broke out in holy laughter when I asked Him to break my alliance with her. In the spider dream, my mom and grandmother weren't talking. The conversation was only taking place between Carly and I. And in the dream, I wasn't mad at her. I knew that she had done me wrong, but I had hoped and believed that she would make it right. I thought that she would do good and give me my own pearls back, make things right between us, and flush the poop, if you will. I truly believed she was better than what she had done against both my mother and myself, and that she would make it right. A common theme between some of my previous Carly dreams. And even after being made aware of the spider in the room, I decided to passively confront it while keeping my physical distance. I left room for the poop in a place it didn't belong. Instead of walking right up to the spider and getting rid of it, I physically removed myself from its presence and just tossed the book, hoping it would land in the right place. By not disposing of it in the proper way, by not doing the dirty work and removing the root of the problem, the spider gained access to me and started charging up the same side of me that actual demon was hovering over me in real life. This dream perfectly represents how I had addressed or not addressed the Carly issue in my life. In 2010, after God started to give me all the dreams about my grandmother and Carly, it wasn't that hard for me to believe who my grandmother really was. And I think I came to terms with her ickiness then, or if not then, I've at least come to full terms with it now. Because Grandma didn't really hide it. But I had never personally witnessed it in Carly, to the extent that my mom in particular had. But that makes sense, because my mom was the only true woman of Christ in that family, and the only real threat to the enemy at that time. I guess I would be considered a threat now too, but we're both removed from that situation now. So even after being woken up by the Holy Spirit in junior high, literally being told by the voice of God that I was in the presence of a demon in her living room, I just didn't want to believe it. Even when I saw the figure of Carly's hidden flesh-colored demon in that dream I previously described, I still didn't want to believe it. But its hands were already touching me, influencing me, charming me, and dancing me backwards into a corner. So, through the years, I have known something is spiritually wrong with Carly. It's not that I haven't believed it. I've known it deep down, but I ignored it. I never asked God what I needed to do. I assumed that by keeping my physical distance, like in the dream, by not keeping in touch with her as much, by not visiting her and Ian anymore, by only seeing them at family gatherings maybe once or twice a year, that I was handling it correctly. But I never dealt with the root issue, never processed it. It was too much, too overwhelming. Just didn't want any of it to be true, though I knew it all along. I hadn't let her go in my heart. I had been holding on to her emotionally, hoping something would change, hoping and believing that one day she would see her own demons and change, not understanding how someone so Christian could be so false. By keeping that hope in my heart, I had unknowingly maintained an emotional alliance with her, and in doing so, the spider was given access to me. In the dream, my mom was in the closest physical proximity to that spider, and the only one in its direct path. But it passed my mom, knowing that it couldn't get to her. That ship sailed long ago, and my mom saw the same demon too, not in the same way or form that I did, but still saw it just the same. And knowing that the demon had been exposed, the demon hid from my mom in fear. Not in fear of my mom, but in fear of Christ who lives in her. God is so much bigger. But I digress again. Point is, the spider passed my mom and went to me. In the same prayer in which I asked God to break my alliance with Carly, I heard, "She is Jezebel." I heard that in my spirit. Not long after I heard those words, the whole spider thing was still on my mind. Out of curiosity, I did a search online to see if anyone else had anything to say about the correlation between the Jezebel spirit and spiders, and I was shocked to see how many articles and YouTube videos refer to the black widow spider as a symbol of Jezebel / her pet. The black widow is carnivorous and will paralyze its victims by catching its prey in their web, injecting them with their poison, which liquefies the prey and then sucks the life out of them. Some heavy stuff. I continued praying on this matter. On October 6th, I was driving in my car again and was asking God to help me let her go. While I was praying, my mouth started involuntarily opening, like really, really wide as my mouth could possibly open over and over. I was a little confused about this, but thought I was going crazy and brushed it off. I was just driving around in my car like with my mouth wide open. But the next day when I was praying in my car before I went into work, God reminded me of the dream that I had had months before, the one that I was standing in my kitchen with my jaw locked. God was opening my mouth back up, literally. In prayer, I was like, "Oh, you opened my mouth back up." And in that moment, I bursted out with holy laughter again. That same day, work was really slow, so I got on YouTube and came across some Christian videos on soul ties. The more I listened, the more sense it made to me that the alliance with Carly, that God called me out of, was on a deep spiritual level. It was that spiritual connection that enabled the enemy's influence into my home, both my spiritual and physical home. It's what locked my jaw, along with a lot of other things starting in 2011-ish that I'm starting to see clearly now. Like why an old friend, for example, had jokingly started calling me Jezebel out of nowhere, just saying that was my gypsy name because I moved so much. But not only did the spider paralyze me spiritually, but I had contributed to my own spiritual paralyzation by not walking in my authority and identity in Christ. I put everything else in the world before God and forgot who I really was in Him. Like, really. Something that stood out to me as I watched those videos that day was by one pastor who specifically spoke about the relationship that Jezebel narcissists have with empaths. I'm definitely an empath. He said that the empath is so sensitive that they usually lose the ability to intellectualize what is actually happening in the relationship, giving all they have while the narcissist takes. The narcissist leaves the empath confused and with a deep emotional longing, demonic soul tie, wondering what they did wrong, wondering what could still be, hoping and believing that the narcissist will change. Remember in the spider dream, pearls were the topic of conversation. Carly had taken my authentic pearls and I didn't speak up to claim what I knew was mine, my faith. Matthew 7:6. Do not give what is holy to dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under your feet and turn and tear you to pieces. I went home that day and prayed some more. Prayed for the Carly topic to weigh heavily on me until it was all finished, until all demonic spiritual ties were broken. And they were immediately after that, or so I thought they were. More to come in the next video, y'all. God bless.